The Bosphorus Strait, a narrow natural waterway cutting through Istanbul, Turkey, is a geographic choke point unlike almost any other on Earth. It is the sole maritime link between the Black Sea and the wider world, a bottleneck that daily handles around 115 vessels. Through this strait, nearly all Black Sea grain exports must pass, and roughly 4% of the world's crude oil. This strategic waterway, controlled by Turkey, determines far more than local shipping traffic. It can decide whether countries thousands of miles away can feed their people. For a dramatic illustration, look no further than Ukraine, one of the world's largest grain exporters. Annually, Ukraine typically sends 40 to 50 million tons of grain to global markets, much of it destined for populations across Africa and the Middle East. But when Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022 blockaded Ukraine's Black Sea ports, that vital flow of food halted almost entirely. Global food prices, which had already been rising since mid-2020, surged to unprecedented levels. The World Food Program warned that 47 million more people were at risk of acute food insecurity. The impact was immediate, severe, and global. But there was a path to relief. In July 2022, a deal brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, called the Black Sea Grain Initiative, reopened a safe humanitarian corridor. For a year, this corridor allowed ships to move grain, other foodstuffs, and fertilizer from 3 key Ukrainian ports. More than 32 million tons of food products passed through the Black Sea in that period. The effect was dramatic. Global food prices, which had peaked in March 2022, fell by nearly 20% from their high by early 2023. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, this downward trend was directly supported by the initiative. This single agreement, facilitated by a country not directly involved in the war, literally helped feed the world and stabilize global markets. So, how did one country, Turkey, gain such immense power over a global supply chain, and why did it step in? It comes down to a century of geopolitical maneuvering and a single international treaty. The strategic importance of the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits is not new. For centuries, control of these waterways, which connect the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara and then the Mediterranean, has been a central question in international relations. From the Ottoman Empire's control since 1453 to the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which demilitarized the area and placed it under an international commission, the question of who holds the keys to this maritime gateway has always been contentious. But the modern regime was established by the Montreux Convention, signed in Switzerland on July 20, 1936. This convention restored full military control of the straits to Turkey. The Montreux Convention is a fascinating document of geographic constraint. In peacetime, it guarantees complete freedom of passage for all civilian vessels. This means that merchant ships carrying everything from oil to wheat can traverse the straits without hindrance. But for military vessels, the rules are much stricter. Non-Black Sea nations' warships have significant limitations on their tonnage, weaponry, and how long they can stay in the Black Sea. They must also provide advance notification to Turkish authorities. Crucially, if Turkey is not involved in a conflict, warships of nations at war are generally forbidden from passing through the straits unless they are returning to their home base. If Turkey itself is at war or feels threatened, it can exercise even broader discretion over all passage. This convention effectively gives Turkey the unique position of being a gatekeeper, not just for its own security, but for regional and global stability. It means that while the Black Sea is a vital trade artery, its connection to the rest of the world is entirely dependent on Turkish policy and adherence to a nearly 90-year-old treaty. There are no alternative maritime routes for the Black Sea nations. A closure or restriction by Turkey would effectively landlock Ukraine's and Russia's Black Sea fleets and, crucially, their export capabilities. Consider the sheer volume involved. Beyond Ukraine's grain, the Turkish Straits are also a critical pathway for energy. Approximately 2.9 million barrels of oil pass through them each day, representing about 3 to 4% of global seaborne oil trade. For Russia, this represents roughly 15% of its seaborne oil exports. While sanctions have redirected some of this oil, the fundamental choke point remains. Any disruption here creates immediate volatility in global energy markets. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Turkey invoked the Montreux Convention, restricting the passage of warships through the straits. This move, while not directly related to commercial shipping, signaled Turkey's active role in managing the conflict's geopolitical fallout through its geographic leverage. But the commercial blockade of Ukraine's ports by Russia was a different challenge. It was a de facto closure of a vital food artery, leading to a humanitarian crisis as food prices soared. The July 2022 Black Sea Grain Initiative was a temporary but critical solution. It created a safe maritime humanitarian corridor for merchant vessels, effectively overriding the wartime blockade for specific, inspected shipments. The United Nations and Turkey mediated the agreement with Russia and Ukraine as signatories. This Joint Coordination Center, set up in Istanbul, oversaw inspections of vessels to ensure they were empty before entering Ukrainian ports and carried only approved cargo when leaving. The success was undeniable. Nearly 33 million tons of grain and other foodstuffs moved to over 40 different countries. More than half of these exports went to developing countries. The World Food Program alone shipped over 725,000 tons of grain to alleviate hunger in places like Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. This was not a permanent fix. Russia withdrew from the Black Sea Grain Initiative in July 2023. Immediately, international wheat prices, which had seen a steady decline, rose again. Fears of renewed food shortages for vulnerable populations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, resurfaced. Somalia, for example, imported 63% of its wheat from Ukraine in 2022, but Ukraine, in partnership with its Black Sea neighbors Romania and Bulgaria, established its own alternative maritime corridor in August 2023. This new route hubs the territorial waters of NATO member states, aiming to minimize the risk of Russian attacks. It has allowed Ukraine to resume high-volume shipments of agricultural products, particularly since October 2023. While not without its challenges, including ongoing Russian attacks on port infrastructure, this corridor has helped to keep grain flowing. In the first half of 2026, the total volume of exports of basic cereals, oilseeds, and their processed products from Ukraine amounted to approximately 27.3 million tons, with 88.4% of this volume exported by sea. The port of Chornomorsk alone shipped about 10.9 million tons. However, the situation remains precarious. As of August 2026, Russian attacks on Ukrainian port infrastructure have intensified, and the security situation in the Black Sea has deteriorated, disrupting shipping. Some ships have reportedly stopped docking in Odessa ports, causing domestic Ukrainian grain prices to fall while world prices rise. This highlights the fragile reality. Even with alternative routes, the Black Sea remains a contested zone, and the smooth flow of grain is constantly under threat. This complex dance between war, trade, and geography shows the almost absurd power of a single geographic feature. The Bosphorus Strait, controlled by Turkey, is not merely a passage, it is a global throttle valve. Turkey, a non-combatant in the Ukraine war, finds itself holding a crucial lever that can directly influence global food security and energy prices. Its decisions, guided by international law and national interest, ripple across continents, deciding whether millions of people eat or go hungry. The fate of distant nations, their stability, and the very price of bread can hinge on the policies of a country situated on a narrow strip of water. The global ripples from the Bosphorus Strait's influence were felt acutely across the United States. The interconnectedness of modern commodity markets means that disruptions far afield quickly translate to domestic pain. When the Black Sea grain flow faltered in early 2022, the price of wheat, a cornerstone of countless American food products, surged. This wasn't merely an abstract global statistic, it directly impacted the shopping carts of everyday Americans. For instance, from January to June 2022, the price of regular motor gasoline rose by 49% across the U.S., with the national average hitting a record $5.01 per gallon in June 2022. This spike wasn't solely due to the Black Sea, but the disruption of Russian oil exports and market uncertainty around the war played a significant role in elevating crude oil prices. These increased energy costs had a cascading effect through the U.S. economy. Major logistics companies like FedEx and UPS, which operate vast ground and air fleets, faced significantly higher operating expenses due to rising diesel and jet fuel prices. In 2022, both carriers implemented substantial fuel surcharges, impacting everything from small package deliveries to large freight shipments for American businesses and consumers. For example, FedEx's fuel surcharge for ground services adjusts weekly based on diesel prices, and similar mechanisms are in place for air services and for UPS. These surcharges are directly passed on, making the cost of nearly every physical good, from electronics to groceries, more expensive to transport across the country. Meanwhile, the U.S. food manufacturers grappled with soaring input costs. Companies like General Mills, which produces popular brands like Cheerios and Gold Medal flour, publicly acknowledged facing significant input cost inflation and supply chain disruptions in their fiscal 2022 reports. While they employ strategies like net price realization to mitigate these pressures, the reality is that a portion of these increased costs is ultimately borne by the consumer in higher prices for pantry staples. The global supply of wheat, for example, is heavily traded on futures exchanges such as the Chicago Board of Trade, where speculation and real-world supply shocks combine to set prices that then influence procurement costs for companies worldwide, including those in the U.S. For American farmers, the disruption of Black Sea fertilizer shipments, a key component for crop yields, led to a surge in input costs. By April 2022, the price of anhydrous ammonia, a crucial nitrogen fertilizer, had jumped over 150% year-over-year, reaching record highs. The fragility of this system is startling. This vital waterway, the Bosphorus, is so narrow at its tightest point, just 700 meters wide, that a single tanker collision could halt all traffic, crippling economies and food supplies across continents. Subscribe to Tradewind, and the next video is waiting for you on screen right now.